Welcome to C2 Biz Growth Iron Sharpens Iron podcast, where CEOs and entrepreneurs share how they are overcoming business growth and sustainability challenges.
Hello, I'm John Hale III, and today we are honored to have Byron Boston as our guest. Byron is the chairman of the board and CEO at Dynex Capital, Inc., a publicly traded real estate investment trust. Byron also serves on numerous corporate and nonprofit boards. Welcome, Byron, to the program today.
Aaron, how are you?
Doing great, fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Yes. No, we are glad you're looking forward. We've been looking forward to this conversation. What we want to start off with, Byron, is discuss a little bit how you're showing up today. We see you as a successful CEO of a publicly traded company. And if you could just share with us what has had the most important impact on how you show up today, either from your childhood or from the earlier part of your career.
Well, let me discuss it let me give you a little bit background and then it'll show you how I showed up today. My career really my life starts in St. Louis, Missouri, is where I grew up. The first 18 years of my life, I grew up in what I would call the very segregated St. Louis, Missouri. So it was a north side of St. Louis was pretty much all African American. South side of St. Louis was white. That's relevant you talk in the 1950s, 60s, and 1970s. And at 18, I got the opportunity to attend Dartmouth College, which was unusual for a student from my community. I was recruited to play football. I had a great high school football coach who I learned a ton from. I had great parents, great family, great community. I had enormous support when I went to Dartmouth, not only from my family, not only from the high school, but also from the community. So I was very fortunate in that sense. And when you say, how do I show up today? I show up a very happy man because I think the older I get, the more I meet people, the more I realize I've just had a very, very blessed life. So, and I go to Dartmouth, I discover economics. I meet Dartmouth alums in St. Louis who help coach me. A guy named Clifton Berry, a Bob Turner, class of 34 at Dartmouth. And they literally coached me, in my opinion, straight to Wall Street, where I started my career in 1981 in finance. So I started in banking with Chemical Bank, went through one of the better training programs in America. And for the first 3 years of my career, I was at Chemical Bank. Bob Turner, who was this advisor alum from Dartmouth, had told me to start my career off and get trained well, and then think about what I might want to do for the longer term throughout my career, which is what I did. Went back to business school in 1984 for 2 years to study accounting and finance, and I came back to Wall Street as a bond trader. And joined one of the better mortgage-backed securities trading desks in 1986. Was very well trained there. And for the next 11 years, I was a bond trader. Then I went from Wall Street to what we call the buy side of Wall Street, with just Freddie Mac as a portfolio manager. And in 2004, I started my first company, a company called Sunset Financial. We did an IPO on the New York Stock Exchange, took it public. It was a de novo company. And for approximately 3 years or so, we operated as a mortgage REIT. Got a takeover bid in 2006, sold the company near the end of 2006. And then 2008 is when I came to Dynex Capital, is where I happen to be today. January 2008, I came to Dynex. I've been there 17 years. And so when you say the two public companies, it's the Sunset Financial first, Dynex Capital second. So as I show up today, look, life is complicated. Relationships are complicated. There's a ton of challenges in the world. Always has been, always will be. But in general, I'm sure I'm a happy man.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. And could you tell us about the gentleman from Dartmouth, the alumni that just took this interest in you? They were with you all the way through and then advising you from the start of your career. That seems like an amazing experience to have someone guide you through that. What was it about them that you actually listened to them and you actually took their advice? I mean, sometimes people can give us advice. That doesn't mean necessarily that we follow or we accept it. What was it about them that made you want to actually follow their advice?
That's a great point. Well, look, when the reason I went to Dartmouth, it's you're talking from St. Louis, African American kid from the inner city of St. Louis, all the way to New Hampshire. The contrast is huge. I completely stepped out of my comfort zone. But what allowed me to become comfortable with Dartmouth was the difference in Dartmouth. I was recruited by multiple Ivy League football teams, and when I went to these alumni sessions to become familiar with the schools, to be honest with you, Dartmouth was the only one that was very inviting. So I'll contrast
Mm,
for you real quick. I
right.
go to Princeton's. They had an alumni there where they were inviting prospective students. I walk in the door. I'm by myself. One guy says hello to me, and then he walks off into the crowd, and literally no one else in the entire crowd spoke to me. And I was just standing there by myself, the only African American in the room, feeling very uncomfortable. And eventually I just slipped out the door and left. Contrast that to Dartmouth. I show up at the Dartmouth alumni event. Again, this time I wasn't by myself. I had my girlfriend with me. And this guy, Clifton Berry, looks over at me through the crowd, walks over, offers me a hand and a smile. And that's what I remember the most. He offered me a handshake and a smile, and it made me feel more comfortable with the Dartmouth crowd. Clifton
Right.
eventually introduced me to other alums in the Dartmouth Alumni Club of St. Louis, Missouri. And I met a guy named Bob Turner, who then started to proceed to really coached me for the next 4 years. I mean, I met Clifton and Bob like before I went to Dartmouth. This is the summer before I started school. And they were willing to just take some time to offer advice. I went back to them, asking questions continually over the next 4 years. I eventually got an internship at a large bank in St. Louis, which they both helped me get that internship.
Mm,
And when I finished that internship, I was told if I would, that the bank in St. Louis would offer me a job, but if I was smart, I would go to New York. They had better training programs. So I went to New York. I did what I was told, right? I was coached a certain way. I'm an athlete. I grew up being coached. If there's a trait that I would tell every young person to develop, be coachable.
fantastic. No, amen. And thank you for sharing that. And when you're at Dynex Capital, can you describe for our audience what Dynex Capital does and why do clients engage with you all? And just from an investment standpoint, why do investors like the Dynex stock?
Well, Dynex was started in 1988. We are a real estate investment trust. In reality, we are an asset management company, and we, in effect, are organized as a real estate investment trust. Dynex has had a couple of different business models within its roots, but at the end of the day, Dynex is what we would consider to be a mortgage REIT, meaning we do
Mhm.
not uh, uh, own real estate. We do make loans against real estate, and
Mhm.
today we own a portfolio of securities that are backed by loans against real estate. What does Dynex do? What do our shareholders want from us? Dynex generates passive income for our shareholders. We take their money in the form of we sell them stock, they give us cash. We have responsibility for their savings. I like to use the word savings. I don't like to use the word capital. Capital is too much of an academic word. I like to use the word savings because it keeps me attached that they're real individuals who bought our stock, and we have responsibility for taking care of their money. We sit between these two important bodies in the United States, savers on one hand, homeowners on the other. And we take the savers' money, we bring it back through the system that ultimately ends up in the homeowners' hands to allow them to purchase a home in America. So these are two very important constituencies in America, savers and homeowners. And so as Dynex Capital, we don't walk around trying to figure out what's our mission. We have a very, very serious mission. We have to take care of our savers' money. And likewise, we support the U.S. housing finance system by managing what I would consider very complex assets that allow homeowners to ultimately purchase homes. What do investors find attractive? We pay an above average dividend yield. So let me explain what I mean by an above average dividend yield. The average dividend yield on the New York Stock Exchange, maybe somewhere between 1% and 3% at most. Um, and closer to one than to 3%.
Right.
Dynex's dividend yield is double digits to that. And so at the end of the day, we take a different type of risk to allow us to pay an above average dividend yield. Why would someone want that in their portfolio? Because they need cash income. What population of people need cash income more than others? Baby boomers, retirees, anyone who's not working in a regular job. Who else might need that income? someone whose expenses may be a little more than the amount of income that they earn. And so therefore, if they've got savings and they want to invest, yes, you can invest in, call it Apple stock and pray that you get 1,000% return. Or you can do it a little more conservatively and invest in an income stock like Dynex Capital, where our goal is to take care of your principal that you invest with us, but still pay you a monthly dividend.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And just the critical role that you're playing in the economy and in essence, helping us pursue that American dream in terms of home ownership and the critical role you play there. So thank you for sharing that.
Let me add one other piece
Yeah,
though, because so many
sure.
people talk about the home ownership, and
Mhm.
this is a personal issue with Byron. I think about the savers first and
Mhm.
foremost because
Gotcha.
it's their money. There's no one else in the financial system or the housing finance system that has any money. The money is from the savers, and I
Mhm.
feel very strong about our obligation at Dynex Capital to take care of our shareholders' money. And so I like to remind myself that these are savers and many are retirees. And I want to take care of their money no matter what happens in the future. And that's our dedication at Dynex Capital. We want to manage their assets in an ethical manner. We want to present an ethical company to them with our policies, our procedures, the people we hire, and every decision that we make. And our ultimate goal is to look out in the future and have our shareholders be happy and to really thank us for taking care of their savings.
No, thank you for sharing that and really driving that point home. And so in terms of just the integrity and those values, as the CEO now, you've had various leadership roles at Dynex, and of course, the other company that you took public on the New York Stock Exchange, and you eventually sold that company. How has your leadership style changed as a CEO, particularly as it relates to making sure that message of integrity and values, what's the mission of the company, permeates throughout the organization?
Well, so one, I've gotten older,
Okay.
which means I've become more experienced at dealing with humans in
Okay.
general. And I think one of the largest challenges is holding a culture across multiple generations of humans in the company. So we're at a unique moment in history in the sense that we have baby boomers, Gen X, millennial, and Gen Z, multiple generations, 8 billion people on the planet. Demographics are shifting. The behaviors, the tastes, the personalities of these generations are different. So my leadership style has had to adjust um, to deal with different people and to lead different people and to lead in a different manner and through different situations. The world has become more complex. Risk is more complex, and so my leadership style has had to change in that respect also. And here's another very important way that my leadership style has changed. As I've learned more about how people view me,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I want to be effective. I want to be effective in leading my team. I want to be effective in persuading my shareholders that their money's going to be okay. I want to be effective in persuading my creditors that if they lend me money, we're going to pay them back and we're going to take care of the loan and the dollars that they give us. I've had to adjust as I've grown older and older and I've learned more about human beings and the world has changed. I've become more on the edge of my seat because I believe global risk has intensified and become far more complex. I've become a much better listener to understand that these generations are different, that at the end of the day, my largest challenges are probably going to come from people, through people, whether it's the risk that's created in the marketplace, that's created by policymakers, or whether there's some other risk in the system where other humans are making decisions that might create a risk event for the financial system that could create problems for us. I've become much more calm, relaxed, and understanding about humans because I believe that's where my largest risk comes from. But it's also where I will gain my most success because I have a team of professionals and I need to motivate this team. I need to train and develop my team. So my leadership style has truly changed as the world has changed. And in addition, it's changed as I've learned more about myself and how people perceive me. So there was a point where someone told me, you're intimidating. And I felt that was at that time a bit of a racist comment, the way it was
Mhm.
made to me.
Okay.
Um, and then eventually I had a conversation with a close friend of mine that went to Dartmouth with me, who's African American and very successful. And she looked at me and said, Byron, you are intimidating. And when I was in college with you, I was very intimidated by you. Boy, that was very insightful. You know, I was a massive power lifter in college. I've always been in the gym. You know, I'm always was lifting. I was big. I was strong. And she was really saying that I was intimidating to her. She was an African American, so I realized I threw a race out of that
Right.
whole
Mhm.
conversation. Even though I do think there's an element of that that's still there, but that's not the main piece. I started to then become much more sensitive to, well, how if I'm saying something, how is that being received, and am I saying it in a manner where that person, whether it's someone on my team, whether it's a shareholder, whether it's an investor, if they're receiving that message the right way. And I elevated the idea that no, I'm not just going to say anything the way I want to say it. I'm not going to make just any decision. I want to be as effective as possible. And to do that, I'm going to have to continue to learn and adjust my leadership style.
That's so interesting, especially the piece about thank you for sharing that, how others perceive you. And I think sometimes that we miss that out. So thank you for sharing that. That's that's very helpful. And you talked about your team, you talked about leadership. Well, also within your organization, and you talked about people and humans being one of the biggest assets you have, but just in terms of the upside and growth of your organization. Then, how do you identify talent, and how do you nurture that leadership within your organization? How do you develop that talent?
So let me start with a book that I read in the 1980s. One of my favorite books is called "They Call Me Coach," and it was written by John Wooden. And I don't know if you're familiar with John Wooden or not, but John Wooden's one of the greatest college basketball coaches that there ever was, right? He had Bill Walton, he had Lou Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I love that book. And a couple of things I took from that book. Number one, um, be very thoughtful about the talent that you pick, right? Your success is going to start with the talent on your team. But number two, teach your team. Period. Coach your team and teach your team. So at this point in our evolution at Dynex Capital, and I would argue for any company in the world because of this massive generational shift that's taking place, training and developing your people is one of the most important strategies that you must focus on. It's always been the case, but there's something very unique about this moment because of the generations and the very huge differences in the generations. If I started to deal with my Gen Z employees, like I'm trying to think of a real baby boomer coach like Bobby Knight, great basketball coach from Indiana. It's not going to fly, right? It just won't work, right? So, the human capital piece is strategy is so important. I think it's a massive risk for every company. So many companies have to make some type of succession shift at the top of the company, or they have to make some type of succession shift within the company where they've got major key person risk. We have small companies like mine where we built the company up over time. You do have key person risk and you have to be very thoughtful about it. But I'm not a believer in hiring smart people and letting them do their thing. I'm a believer in hiring smart people and making them better through really thoughtful coaching and developing. And I believe at Dynex we can gain a competitive edge by developing.
Thank you for sharing that, and that book as well. When you talk about developing people in the team, how have you guys reacted to the hybrid work environment? Maybe that's generational. I've heard people say that. Maybe it's not. But how do you deal with that hybrid work environment where some individuals may demand or really want that?
All right, tonight I'll have to give you a little bit, a little more of a story then. So, I have dealt with a hybrid or remote work environment since 2004.
Okay.
And here's what happened. So then back to the whole story of of building two public companies and doing what it takes and what's necessary to succeed. When I started Sunset Financial in 2004, I needed help. But we're a de novo company and we didn't have much of a budget. And so how can I persuade someone with experience to come and help me build this company? They would have to have bought into the idea that they would make limited amount of money at first, but if this company succeeds, then they would do better. And I had a teammate from my prior life at Freddie Mac, a woman named Smriti Papano, who was still with me today. She had recently had a baby and she was a new mom. Well, she wasn't a new mom. This is her second child, but she had a very young baby at home and she had a very large job offer from a much larger company that I think would have required her to travel some of the time. And I went to her and I said, look, I can't pay you what that company pays, but I can allow you to stay at home and you can stay at home 5 days. The only time I need you to show up is like once a quarter for a board meeting. And she took the offer. In building that first public company, it was Smriti Papano and myself building that company along with some other people from Jacksonville, Florida. But we were the main ones running the capital of the company. So that was my first test with remote work. It went phenomenal. Smriti been couldn't have been a better person for me to have offered that job to and to have accepted that job. So imagine that Sunset. Now I come to Dynex Capital in 2008. We got a takeover bid. We sell Sunset. Now in 2008, I've got another challenge. Life was fantastic after I sold the first company, but then my wife became gravely ill. And now I've got a challenge because this illness is huge. She's in a coma. We don't know that she's going to live. I've got two little boys, one in, I don't know, maybe they're first and third grade or second and fourth grade. I can't remember exactly. They were two very small, young elementary kids whose mom had disappeared. And so I had a challenge. I couldn't handle this very large, uncertain illness on Cobra, and Cobra was going to run out within 6 months. So I was going to lose my health insurance, and I didn't want no private company was going to take us with this big of an illness. And so I needed a job. And so the CEO of Dynex Capital had been talking to me about helping rebuild Dynex Capital. It was a small company. It had fallen on tough times in 1998, and this was a turnaround situation. So I needed something, and I needed to work remotely because my wife was very ill here in Jacksonville, Florida. She was being cared for by the Mayo Clinic, and for the most part, and I needed to work remotely. I could come to town for a certain amount of time, but I needed to be remote. So Dynex Capital offered me the opportunity to be remote, and I offered them the opportunity to write a business plan and come and lead the restructuring and rebuilding of Dynex Capital. That really, when I got to Dynex, to be honest, I wish I could tell you, oh, I came here to build this company and be this successful entrepreneur. At the end of the day, I had some really personal issues. I needed health insurance. I needed to make it work. I approached it the way I approached any other task in life, especially as an athlete. You go in, how do I gain a winning edge? How do I build this? I've got very strong reasons to try to make the company succeed.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a fantastic story about remote work and how it's worked for you on both sides of it,
Well,
if you
let
will.
me add one other piece on that
Yeah.
because I was remote when 2020 happened. We as a company by that time, we were very comfortable with remote work. We had been
Yes.
on Zoom for at least, I think, a couple of years. Prior to Zoom, we were on GoToMeeting. Prior to that, we were using Skype. So we had a system of remote work when the pandemic hit. We were
Right.
familiar with it. However, now that we're 5 years past the pandemic, we are recognizing some of the challenges of remote work. We're adjusting to that. Our staff does come to the office X amount of days per week. We try to get them in there all at the same time. So I still operate remotely, but a lot of times I have to travel anyway to New York City or DC or some other place. And so we're very comfortable with the remote work, but there are limitations to it. And if someone said to us now, like, I've got to work remotely That's not necessarily, our minds. We're very flexible in terms of working with the right employees' needs. But if it's just some young person who wants to go to Tahiti and work because they want to hang out in the sun, yeah, you're gonna have to work for somebody else.
Understood. Thank you for sharing that. Very unique perspective on that business situation that we're all grappling with here on a regular basis.
Sure.
Also wanted to get your sense of just your perspective on how CEOs can leverage their board of directors to help them grow and scale the company. A lot of times we hear about the board's purpose, number one job. One may be told is to hire and fire the CEO, have some accountability in the company. But how can a CEO use that board or their board to help them grow and scale their company?
First, I think the board of a company like Dynex, which was again very, very small company that had the challenge of growing. And really, to be honest with you, we started trying to build out our company to grow right in the middle of the great financial crash. So a lot of professionals cannot be successful as a board member at Dynex Capital because we are an entrepreneurial. Many board members, they might be on GE's board, they might be on GM's board, they might be on some other large company board. You don't fit on Dynex Capital's board. You might
Right.
think you do, but you don't.
Mhm. Mhm.
And everyone believes they can be an entrepreneur, work in an entrepreneurial environment, but they really, really can't. It's a lot more creative, unstructured, thought process. And so many boards and board members think are kind of what I would call box checkers for some what they would call governance. At Dynex Capital, the unique thing about when I got here in 2008, and I really applaud the board of directors who are here, they weren't, they were five activist investors. They were not what I would call the box checking big corporate board of directors. But what they truly had was ownership governance. They had their money invested in Dynex Capital. And I'll never forget the first week I got to Dynex, three of those board members met with me individually to demand that I understand the fact that this is their money, that I did not have a right to come in and blow their money up. And that lesson was really important to me because I call it ownership governance. That meant the board of directors truly own the company. And many of the shareholders who were invested in Dynex in 2008 were invested in Dynex because they knew the board owned so many shares in the company. So they felt comfortable that the board was going to make decisions that was aligned with shareholders. I then met a shareholder at that time who emphasized to me that he wanted me to own a ton of Dynex Capital stock because he wanted me aligned with his interests.
Right.
And that had a huge impact on me. So here I sit 17 years later. I do own a lot a lot of my personal net worth is tied up in Dynex Capital stock. And when I think about board members, I'm looking for something unique other than just the average large company board member I'm going to meet at the National Association of Corporate Directors Conference. And in many situations, many of the people I meet there, I don't necessarily feel would fit perfectly in this entrepreneurial environment. They'll fit better in some larger kind of structured, stuffy boardroom, as opposed to a creative environment like Dynex Capital, where we're trying to build a company and there's not exactly a roadmap to do it. So we need to be, and we have been at Dynex, very targeted in terms of the skill sets that we need on the board. So we recently went through a large, and I'll say large board refreshment, and I'll say large only because the percentage of new board members we got within 1 year was well over 50%.
Yeah.
And part of it was deliberate, where we felt like we needed to refresh a couple of board seats. Another situation was unfortunate, where we had one board member suddenly pass away. And then another board member was a natural process of premiering my co-CEO, Smriti Papano, to the board. In that process, we had already identified very specific skill sets that we needed. So I'm going to use an example. We have someone on our board, Marie Shandoa. She was former CEO of Schwab Investment Management. And you would think that, wow, that we would want Marie because of her CEO experience at Schwab. And that's secondary to me. What was more important was I knew she had had this experience building a smaller asset manager. So I knew she had had this entrepreneurial experience, which is what, in my opinion, we needed the most. Um, Secondarily to that, we needed technology skills at the board seat, but we didn't need just some tech guy. You get all kind of tech guys will advertise themselves as potentially being a good board member. We didn't need just some tech guy. We needed a technology expert who understood the asset management and investment management trading universe. So it was very specific and very targeted. But once again, we added Alan Crawford to our board, who has exactly the background that we needed. And all of the professionals, we had ended up adding three new professionals. Andrew Gray is another one. And that skill set was really what was around risk management and strategic planning. And we got the skill sets that we needed. But each one of those people, we had to assess what we think they'll be like in an entrepreneurial environment. And I think we hit a home run, to be honest with you, with this last
That's
board
fantastic.
refreshment.
That's fantastic. Thank you for walking us through just the methodology and that approach that you took. Appreciate that. That's very helpful for our audience. I also want to get a sense of, we hear about technology. Of course, we hear about AI, generative AI, etc. But how do you embrace technology as a CEO, and be it AI or other technologies? How are you using them just to make you guys better?
All right, so I'm going to tie you back to my initial story where I told you I had a great high school football coach. Now,
Yep.
his name was Charlie Sherritts,
Yep.
and he's a great coach. And what he taught me was, how do you gain a winning edge?
Hmm.
How do you gain an edge? And he even started a bar at one point, and he called it the winning edge. And he gave me like a write up from Vince Lombardi about the winning edge. And I learned that in high school. So literally part of my DNA on a daily basis, I'm always walking around thinking, how do I gain an edge? How do I gain a winning edge? It's not that I'm looking to beat someone or put someone down. I don't need to do that. I'm chairman and co-CEO of Dynex Capital. We have a challenge is to take care of our shareholders' money. So I'm constantly thinking, how can I gain a winning edge? How can I gain an edge on being able to succeed and meet our goals? And technology can provide that. I'm not a technological person. I just told you about that board search. I felt very strong that we needed a technology skill set at the board, but one that could help us think strategically into the future. So I would love to find a way that we can gain a competitive edge using technology. And I believe it's there. I'm not a technology expert, so I'm engaging with others who are technology experts. What's great is we hired a new chief investment officer, and he too is someone who we've known a long time, grew up as in the investment management world, but then went back to school to develop skills and knowledge in technology. We recently added another professional. The reason we added them is because of his technology background. So in general, from my seat as um, uh, chairman and co-CEO, not a technology expert, but I have a clear vision based on, again, learning, constantly thinking about how do I gain a competitive edge? How do I gain a winning
Right.
edge?
Right. Right.
I believe technology can provide that. And so we've changed
Hmm.
our chief technology officer, probably hired him new within the last year and a half or so. All of it's with the intention of how do we gain a competitive edge? How can we do our job better? How can we increase the probability that we will make the right decision for our shareholders into the future? And global risk has become more complex. Global risk has become more intensified. Do not for one second think that we're just going to, that there'll be smooth sailing for the next decade. So we're anticipating that there's not going to be smooth sailing. We are anticipating how can we use technology to help us and increase the probability that we make the right decision. So we are focused. We've made the personnel changes to help us in that direction. We will continue thinking that way. And if I had my co-CEO, Smriti Papano, on here, she's all fired up about this topic. So am I. And in fact, as a baby boomer CEO, I am saying to myself, I need to up my technology game. That's how serious I think this moment is.
Right.
You know what it would be? Okay, give you a sports example. If you were one of the
Yes.
if you one of the coaches, when the rules were changed and passing became a larger element of the football game, if you're one of the coaches who still relied upon a running back, as most teams did in the 1970s, you were left behind. Terry Bradshaw, I think, like in one of the Super Bowls in the 1970s, he threw like, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 passes. Hey, quarterbacks are throwing 30, 40, maybe 50 passes in a game.
That's
You
right.
understand?
Right.
So, and
Right.
when environment changes, if you want to gain a competitive edge, you need to change with the environment. This environment is changing. And at Dynex, we fully intend to stay on top of it.
Gotcha. Could you also share with us, just from your observation point, what are some common mistakes you see other CEOs making as they're trying to grow their companies? And is there ways that they can avoid these pitfalls, you think?
One of the largest, in my opinion, this is a Byron opinion. It comes back to what I was saying about human beings. Ego can create a huge problem. So you want the confidence, but you don't want your ego to blind you in a manner that increases the probability that you make a mistake. So you asked the question here at the beginning. You said, well, how are you showing up today? So I think you really want to evaluate, how did that CEO show up into that CEO seat? Let me give you some examples. Suppose there's some kid carrying around baggage from middle school or high school. By the time they get into that CEO seat, now they're the boss. This is their biggest moment. And I've seen that personality. They're very prone to make mistakes. Where I would argue with you that when I look at my own personal background and career, I've been blessed to be a leader since I was 10. I was president of my senior class in high school, captain of the football team, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been leading people a long time. I feel very fortunate to be in this role. And I view it as really a servant leader's role to see the chairman and co-CEO of Dynex, because I've got this responsibility for someone else's money. And in many respects, a lot of those investors are retirees who aren't working anymore. I think it's a big role. I think it's a big mission. And I don't want to allow my ego to get in the way. So I don't have anything to prove in this job. I don't have it. But I can tell you when I look at some other CEOs, they look like someone who has something to prove sometimes, or someone who's carrying around baggage from their past. And I just think it leaves them more vulnerable to making a mistake, more vulnerable to not listening to another opinion, and recognize how complex the world is today. I think you need a very collaborative approach to decision making. You want to remain a leader and understand your role as a leader in making decisions. But I think CEO's ego in many situations, their humanness can completely get in the way. And they may have success 10 times in a row. And one of my advisors said to me, the CEO cannot get drunk off of their past successes, because
I love
then
that.
you'll make a mistake as you go forward. And so you want to be very cautious about allowing that ego to get in your way. And, I approach the future from a scientific perspective in a more scientific manner. understanding exactly our goals at Dynex Capital of wanting to take care of our shareholders over the long term, and the fact that I'm totally aligned with them, meaning I've got a material amount of my net worth tied up in the company.
Right.
So you look to build a team around you that's very talented, but you also want to engage that team to ensure that you're making decisions that reflects the best of the talent and increases the probability that you make success, that you have success. Here's another mistake that I also see is when you,
Mhm.
as a CEO, again, back to this ego piece,
Right.
you feel as if the people who have left you their money, the investors, or in some situation, if you're borrowing money from a lender, you don't respect the fact that this is someone else's money. This is not your money. So as I said, back when I first got the Dynex, those board members made it clear to me it was their money. I totally respect that. And I respect that today. I've got, maybe our balance sheet. I think we just reported maybe a 1.4, $1.5 billion balance sheet. That's a lot of someone else's money. And I have an enormous amount of respect for the fact that I'm managing someone else's savings. Um, when I've talked to other CEOs, I've talked to others entrepreneurs who want to start companies. So often I just don't see them respecting the fact that it's someone else's money. Think about the FTX, those young people who were with FTX. They didn't respect the fact that they had someone else's money. They were just like, they're like little smart kids. Well, we're going to act like we were in school or something. I don't know what they were doing,
Right.
but you had someone else's money. You just can't do anything you can't take someone else's money and decide to do whatever you want. You got to take care of their money and being very respectful of the fact that, your ego again getting involved. Your investors, your other stakeholders, your lenders, especially in Dynex, we're a leveraged institution, so our lenders are very, very important to us. Our other stakeholder are our employees. You got to take care of your stakeholders
Yes.
to succeed over
Right. Right. That leads me to my next question: the lessons you could share with other CEOs on how to engage and develop relationships with investors, be it equity or debt. At some point, you're going to always need those to grow and scale your company. What lessons can you share that you learned throughout your career for other CEOs?
Boy, can I just talk about relationships in general? I
Wait,
think,
right ahead. Yeah.
gosh, I just think this has turned out to be one, if I look back in hindsight, one of the most surprising areas for me.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
I'm not a great networker, but I've
Mhm.
got a great network. But you see, I'll give you an example of me, and people argue with me on this. And I'll say, hey, there's a hugely introverted side of me. And so I'll go to some event and then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the event, they'll say, we're having a networking cocktail party or something of that nature. And I go into those events and I might be sitting there in a corner by myself. I mean, I'm not the greatest. Is like, hey, my name is Byron. What's yours? And that's just not my strength.
Right.
But I've got a big network, and that network really came through for me in building Dynex Capital and in Sunset Financial. So I really want to talk about relationships in general since you brought up the topic. I was really surprised at how it worked out. So imagine 2000. So I started my career in 1981, and now in 2008, I'm about to try to do a turnaround of a company right in the right in the middle of the great financial crash. So I'm now going to Wall Street. For Dynex to be successful, we have to have credit relationships on Wall Street, someplace that we can borrow money. We have to have credit relationships, someone who will do trades with us. Um, I need banking relationships, someone that will raise equity for us. And in January of 2008, Dynex had none of these. And so now I've got to go to Wall Street. The world is blowing up. I'm calling up people I know and saying, hey, I'm at Dynex Capital and I'm looking to rebuild their balance sheet. And what I'm very proud of is, and with only one exception, everyone took my call and we were able to open up credit lines and trading relationships and Wall Street relationships in 2008. And I tip my hat to JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan is very near and dear to my heart. There are two bankers there that I met in January of 2004, John Simmons and Jared Kay, who did my first IPO when I was at Sunset Financial. And I come back to the street in January of 2008. I give them a call. John Simmons especially was in the seat at that time. And I love the response. Come on in. Let's talk about it.
Right.
It happened at multiple other shops on the Wall Street. So the relationships were built. That's a short term, but let me talk about some of the long term relationships. In three situations, I'm now going to banks looking for credit. And in each one of those situations, there was someone there in that decision process who had worked with me, call it 15 years earlier, 20 years earlier, and who felt very strong about how I had treated them in our relationship 20 years before or 15 years before, such that they backed us at Dynex and getting credit again in 2008 at that time. So I really learned the power of relationships. But my relationships really came from being a teammate. When I worked at Chemical Bank, when I worked at First Boston, even when I was at Dartmouth or the University of Chicago, when I was at Freddie Mac. But really, these relationships on the street were really from years before. And now I'm coming back to the street, to Wall Street, to open these credit lines. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. We're right in the middle of the great financial crash. So
Right.
now I realized, in hindsight, as I look back now over my career, how important those relationships were. How important it is to be a teammate when you're on a team together at that time. There's a concept, friends in the spot. When you're working at a company, you're on the same team. That's your teammate. I'm an athlete. I didn't grow up playing singles tennis. I grew up playing football where there's 11 men on one side of the field, 11 men on the other side. You have to work with other people to succeed. It's not an individual game. It's like just part of my DNA in terms of being a teammate. And the way Dynex ultimately turned out, where I was able to reestablish relationships on Wall Street with people that I hadn't seen in 20, 30 years, and they were willing to engage with us, it was just an eye-opening lesson for me. But I'll admit again, I'm not the greatest networker. You put me in some kind of networking, cocktail party, and I'll be sitting
Right.
over in a corner by myself. But along the way, if you're a teammate of mine, you're my
Right.
teammate. We're on the same team together. You can rely upon me. We'll build a relationship together.
Thank you for sharing that, Byron. And former high school football player, played a very successful program in the state of Michigan. I was an average player, but the relationships you get and what I love about what you said about networking is being a good teammate. And to be a good teammate, you have to give up yourself. So many people look at networking as what can I get out of Byron? What can Byron do for me? But building a relationship is what are you doing for somebody else? And so thank you for that story. It's very powerful.
I agree
I
with you.
appreciate that. Yeah, I
Teammates. That's
appreciate
the
it.
key word. Teammates.
Teammates, yeah. If you're a teammate, you're investing into somebody. You're not just looking at someone as a mark for what I can get from them for who you know or how they can be useful to your own agenda.
And
You're
then you
investing in
tie
other
this
people.
back to what you asked about CEOs. At the end of the day, a corporation is not a thing. It is a group of people, just the same
Mm-hmm.
way as a football team. It's a group of people. And the reason I love using football as an example is because there's 11 men, right, on each side of the ball. So you're not going to succeed. Tom Brady gets too much credit. He's nothing without that offensive line blocking for him.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
And so you really need to learn how to operate and succeed with a group of other humans. And if you have an ego that think it's all about you, maybe you succeed sometimes. And I don't think it's the best over the long term. I'm a believer in being a good teammate, developing strong teams, building your teammates up, and being happy to see your teammates succeed as well as to see yourself succeed.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. Last question I was asked you, Byron, is what's your next hill to climb individually, and what's the next hill to climb for Dynex? What's the next chapter?
Well, at Dynex, let me start with Dynex. Look, we've
Okay.
got a very serious, and we always have. We are strong believers in strategic planning.
Mhm.
It's a complex world today, and we have a plan. We are growing our company. We're growing our capital base with the concept of resilience. We need to build a resilient company that can survive no matter what happens in the future. That means people, means process, and you already asked the question, it means technology. And we're focused on all three with a very, from my perspective, very important emphasis on building our human capital, training our team, trying to ensure that we have the appropriate amount of people within the company. To do that, that means you incur some cost to build the right,
Mhm.
put the right company in place. And as such, we need to build our capital base to spread that cost or across a broader set of shareholders. And so
Mhm.
we're right, and it's a great opportunity to do that because the asset class in which we are investing is cheap at this moment. So for Dynex Capital, we will continue to look forward into the future. We will continue to look to deliver for our shareholders a steady stream of cash income, which is very important. But most importantly, we want to continue to make them comfortable that their savings is okay in the hand of the Dynex Capital team. Then, from an individual perspective, look, I'm 67 years old. I'm proud of it. And even if I lived another 30 years, the fact of the matter is that's still the backside of the mountain. And I'm not looking.
Right.
I'm not looking. I'm not tired. I've got enormous amount of energy. I'm intellectually curious. I love economics, love finance, love markets.
Right.
And so it's not so much in terms of the next hill to climb. I am focused on training the team of professionals at Dynex Capital. I am very focused. I gave you the example at the beginning of this call about Bob Turner and Clifton Berry, those older alums who poured into me
Mhm.
when I was a young, just starting at Dartmouth. So I have a huge heart for students that are like me, meaning, my parents, I have great parents, I have a phenomenal family. We're still very close. Sisters, cousins, uncles, nephews. I'm really close, nieces, nephews with my family. So I grew up rich with family. So that's very, very important to me. And but I'm a huge believer in helping my family and helping other students that are like me, where I have a great family. My parents didn't go to college. My dad had 8 years of education, great American citizen, decorated World War II vet, but they couldn't necessarily advise me about all the ins and outs of going to college. And so there are other students who are still trying to make this journey, just like I made this journey. I generally am focused on Dartmouth College, looking for those students who are like me, where I can be a mentor. That's really very, very, very important to me. And I think it's an excellent way to be able to give back. I just connected with this organization, Thrive, here in Jacksonville. This was really fun to really get to know this organization and some of the students, first generation students who are on their way to college. I just think it's very, very important. So is it a next hill to climb? One day I'm going to die, and I want someone to say, "Hey," I want someone to call me coach, just like the John Wooden
Right.
book. They call me coach. I want my
Right.
family to say, "Hey, Byron was a great family member who really helped us and gave back." I want my teammates to say, "Hey, Byron was a great uh, teammate." And then, as I said before, it's important. I want them to say, "Hey," I want them to call me coach.
All right. Well, thank you, Coach. I appreciate it. We want to thank you for joining us today for C2 Biz Growth Iron Sharpens Iron podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, LinkedIn, Spotify, the cornerstonegroup.us website, and other locations. We invite you to listen, subscribe, and share. See you next time.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the C2 Biz Growth Iron Sharpens Iron podcast. And check us out on social media, share, and subscribe.